When people talk about the best defenses in NFL history, they immediately jump to either the '85 Bears or the 2000 Ravens. But if you're talking about the most feared defense, well, that crown belongs to the Oakland Raiders of the 1970s.
You go into cities, and actually these teams would be beat long before we got there.
From Ted Hendricks towering over offenses to George Atkinson knocking out opponents.
The hit that I received by George Atkinson was basically criminal.
Or Jack Tatum literally paralyzing a receiver on the field.
Jack would come up with the head under the chin, and the guy would be gone.
These outlaws hit so hard and were so dominant.
I love the idea that I know down deep they fear us. They fear everything about us.
That the league had to change the rules because of them.
Raider rule number 1, cheating is encouraged. Raider rule number 2, see rule number 1.
Meet the most feared defense in NFL history. Their secondary was nicknamed the Soul Patrol, and at the center of it all was safety Jack Tatum, better known as the Assassin. At just 5'10" and 200 pounds, he wasn't a very big guy, but he sure hit like one.
Tatum's shots sounded different. Most guys tackle, and you hear shoulder pad, there's a certain sound you make. But a Tatum tackle was like a car wreck.
In his very first NFL game, he knocked both of the Colts tight ends out and set the tone for a career defined by violence.
We used to keep score. 1 point for a limp off, but a knockout was like Tatum's specialty.
Tatum's hits became infamous, none more devastating than the one in 1978 that left Patriots receiver Darryl Stingley paralyzed. He also snagged 37 interceptions, racked up 736 return yards, and set an NFL record with a 104-yard fumble return in 1972. He earned 3 straight Pro Bowls from 1973 to 1975, proving he was as much a playmaker as he was a punisher.
I've caught receivers looking for me instead of looking for the ball. If you can get a receiver thinking about you, but then he can't be concentrating on you and the ball at the same time.
Playing alongside him was George the Hitman Atkinson, a 7th-round pick out of tiny Morris Brown College. He was never supposed to last in the NFL. Instead, he became one of the nastiest safeties and one of the most dangerous return men of the 1970s.
So he would come in from the side and just hook him right across the face, in the eyes, in the nose, under the chin.
As a rookie, he took an 86-yard punt to the house, set an NFL record with 205 punt return yards in a single game, and earned AFL Defensive Rookie of the Year honors. Over his career, he piled up 30 interceptions and 4 defensive touchdowns, always showing up in big moments. But his real legacy was intimidation.
When he stepped on the field, he just had attitude.
Atkinson wrecked fear in the hearts of everyone.
Against the Steelers, he knocked out Lynn Swann twice with brutal hits, leading Chuck Noll to brand him part of football's criminal element. For Atkinson, that was Raider football at its finest. But if Tatum and Atkinson were the Raiders' muscle, Willie Brown was the brain. Undrafted out of Grambling and snagged by Al Davis in 1967, Brown became the Raiders' defensive captain and master of the bump and run, a style that bullied receivers and wrecked passing games.
When Willie jammed you, you had a war. It wasn't just somebody pushing you or shoving you or redirecting you. You were in a war.
He finished with 54 interceptions, tied for the most in team history, and 9 Pro Bowl nods. In the playoffs, he embarrassed legends like Brian Griese, Terry Bradshaw, Len Dawson, taking their passes back for touchdowns. If you were a Hall of Fame QB in the 70s, chances are Willie Brown made you look silly. Rounding out the Soul Patrol was Skip Thomas, better known as Dr. Death. The nickname didn't come from his hits, but from Boomer Brown saying he looked like the cartoon character. Yet, it still fit his style perfectly. A 7th-round pick in 1972, Thomas shocked everyone with back-to-back 6-pick seasons in 74 and 75. At 6'1" and 205 pounds, he was bigger and meaner than most corners, built perfectly for the Raiders' bump-and-run defense. Now, swagger was never in short supply with Oakland, but Dr. Death took it to another level. And while he embodied the Raiders' fearless attitude in the secondary, that same energy lived in the front seven too, especially in a 6'7" linebacker nicknamed the Mad Stork, Ted Hendricks. Born in Guatemala City, he became the first Guatemalan-born player in NFL history. And at 6'7", with arms like goalposts, he was unlike anything offenses had ever seen. By the time he landed in Oakland in 1975, he was already a champion. But in silver and black, he was unleashed. Over 9 seasons, Hendricks piled up 61 sacks, 26 interceptions, 16 fumble recoveries, 25 blocked kicks, and tied the NFL record with 4 career safeties. But it wasn't just the stats. It was chaos. One day, he'd ride a horse to practice. The next, he'd show up in a costume.
Very strange human. Very strange.
You never knew what was coming, and neither did the opposing offense. Up front, the Raiders had Otis Sistrunk, maybe the most unlikely star on defense. He never played college ball. Instead, he went from the Marines to a Milwaukee meatpacking plant to semi-pro football before Oakland found him. At 6'4", 265 pounds, bald-headed with steam rising off his skull on cold nights, he looked like a Raider. On Monday Night Football, his bio simply read U.S. Marines. Alex Karras joked he must have graduated from the University of Mars, and from then on, he was a silver and black legend. But Sistrunk wasn't just a character, he could play. A Pro Bowler in 1974, he became one of the league's most disruptive tackles, piling up fumble recoveries, even 3 interceptions, and anchoring a front that punished quarterbacks. He brought Marine grit, street toughness, and the edge that made the Raiders feared. Together, Jack Tatum, George Atkinson, Willie Brown, Skip Thomas, Ted Hendricks, and Otis Sistrunk formed the backbone of the most feared defense we've ever seen. And the results spoke for themselves. In 1970, the first year of the AFL-NFL merger, the Raiders went 8-4-2, claiming yet another division crown, their 4th straight, led by Al Davis's rebellious, just win, baby philosophy.
Just win, baby.
The Raiders leaned into their outlaw identity. Quarterback George Blanda, at 43 years old and left for football dead, came off the bench for 5 straight weeks and turned into a miracle worker. Week after week, he saved the Raiders with last-second heroics, dragging them out of sure defeat and into division-clinching wins. But make no mistake, it was Oakland's defense that set the tone, and they did it with violence. Against Kansas City, defensive end Ben Davidson speared quarterback Len Dawson late after a scramble, sparking one of the biggest bench-clearing brawls of the decade. Helmets came off, fists were thrown, and the game devolved into chaos. Exactly the kind of mayhem the Raiders thrived on. The Raiders eventually clawed their way into the postseason, where they knocked off the up-and-coming Miami Dolphins in a slugfest. That set up an AFC Championship clash against the Baltimore Colts. In the 4th quarter, the Colts finally pulled away, 27-17 on their march to a Super Bowl title. But for the Raiders, this was only the beginning. Because in 1971, the Oakland Raiders used their first-round draft pick on the aforementioned safety Jack Tatum, the assassin. The Soul Patrol was fully assembled, and they turned mistakes into 35 turnovers that year. Oakland opened the season by shutting out the Chargers 34-0, then getting wins over Cleveland, Denver, Philadelphia, and Cincinnati. However, despite finishing 8-4-2, they lost the division on a tiebreaker and missed the playoffs. But head coach John Madden wouldn't let that happen again. In 1972, they tore through the regular season at 10-3-1, reclaiming the AFC West crown and finishing the year on a 6-game win streak. Their defense suffocated opponents, giving up the 2nd fewest points in the conference. Jack Tatum was putting together a season of bone-rattling highlights that made wide receivers flinch before running routes across the middle. Willie Brown erased entire halves of the field, and the rest of the Soul Patrol secondary, George Atkinson, Jimmy Warren, and Skip Thomas, turned every pass into a gamble with consequences. In the AFC divisional round, Oakland was sent to Pittsburgh to face a young, scrappy Steelers team still searching for its first real taste of postseason glory. For nearly 4 quarters, the Raiders' defense had done its job. They bullied Terry Bradshaw, cut off Franco Harris's running lanes, and kept the scoreline to a 7-6 slugfest in their favor. With under 30 seconds left, Steelers quarterback Terry Bradshaw dropped back on 4th and 10, desperate, about to be swallowed up by the Raiders' pass rush. He heaved the ball downfield where it ricocheted violently off Frenchie Fuqua and seemed destined for the turf. But just before it hit the ground, Franco Harris scooped it up in stride and ran it into the end zone.
Did it touch him or didn't it touch him?
and only he knows.
The back judge had raised his arms to signal the touchdown, but the other members of the crew did not. The refs huddled up and minutes passed. Referee Fred Swearingen went to the Steelers sideline and asked for a telephone.
And he gets on the phone and he makes a call to someone. Then he hangs up. Then he walks out into the middle of the field and says, touchdown. No one knows who that guy talked to. That question has never been answered to this day.
A call was placed to the press box, where, legend has it, that the phone was answered either by Steelers Public Relations Director Joe Gordon or by Dan Rooney, the son of the Steelers owner.
They asked the question, how much security do we have?
10 minutes after the play, Swearingen went to midfield and raised his arms to signal a touchdown in what would forever go down as the Immaculate Reception.
I know for a fact that those officials knew that that play was not a legal play.
However, the Raiders players didn't take it so well.
I saw Jack Tatum hit Fuqua right in the back. I saw the whiplash.
There were 3 infractions on that one play, explains George Atkinson, the Raiders safety who saw the play develop in front of him. I saw the ball hit Fuqua, and I saw the tip of the ball touch the ground. 2 offensive players couldn't touch the play. Then Franco picked it off the ground. That was the second infraction. And then Phil Villapiano got clipped on that play. Villapiano reinforced that, later saying, the tight end dove right at the back of my legs. To this day, I think about that. If I had fallen, maybe I would have gotten the ball. If he hadn't hit me, I would have caught Franco.
I think I make that play, and we have no Immaculate Reception.
So, should it have been a touchdown? No one knows. But to this day, it remains one of the most controversial plays in NFL history. I call it the Immaculate Deception, Atkinson said.
Nobody will ever say, Frenchie won't say, and Franco won't say, and I understand it's one of the greatest plays in the history of the sport.
And when he was asked about whether or not he had touched it, Fuqua said, I'll never tell.
The question, Frenchie, did you touch the ball? Maybe, maybe not.
But if you know anything about the Raiders, you know what came next. That heartbreak didn't break them. It hardened them. Because in 1973, Oakland played like a team with a score to settle. The tone was set immediately in Week 2. Miami came into Berkeley riding an 18-game winning streak, fresh off their perfect season. They hadn't lost in nearly 2 years, until they ran into the silver and black. In a brutal, low-scoring slugfest, Oakland's defense throttled the champs, holding Bob Greasy and that famous backfield to just 7 points. And now they had Ted Hendricks, the Mad Stork, a 6'7" chaos machine who could blitz, cover, and bat down passes like a giant shadow. By mid-season, they looked unstoppable. They shut out the Giants 42-0, left Kansas City battered in a 37-7 demolition, and bullied their way back to another AFC West crown. And then came the divisional round, where they found themselves matched up with none other than the Pittsburgh Steelers. Only this time, there were no miracles. Oakland jumped on Pittsburgh early. The defense swarmed Terry Bradshaw, and by the fourth quarter, the Coliseum was rocking as the Raiders poured it on in a 33-14 beatdown. However, next week, Oakland ran into Don Shula's Miami Dolphins, who ended their season 27-10, one step shy of the Super Bowl. Yet another playoff frustration, and the Raiders were not happy about it. So, Oakland ripped through the 1974 season with a 12-2 record. Their only losses coming by a combined 4 points. The Raiders rolled into the postseason loaded with swagger, and fate dealt them the 2-time defending champion Miami Dolphins in the divisional round. Every snap was a collision of wills. Ken Stabler and Bob Greasy trading punches through the air, while Miami's ground game slammed again and again into a wall of silver helmets and bad intentions. With under a minute left, down 26-21, Stabler trotted into the huddle with the weight of Oakland's tortured history pressing down on his shoulders. The Dolphins' pass rush swarmed as the play unraveled, and Stabler rolled left, every step shrinking the pocket around him. He was a heartbeat and inches away from the ground when he flicked the ball into the end zone.
That ball looked like it was going end over end. There was no way in hell that anybody was going to catch that thing.
And there, in the middle of the chaos, stood Clarence Davis. Not open, not even close.
When you drew up that play, the last receiver that you would throw it to would have been Clarence Davis.
But somehow, impossibly, the ball found him. Davis fought through the storm, ripped it from the sky, and when he hit the ground, it was cradled against his chest. Touchdown.
Hey, touchdown Raiders! Touchdown Raiders! I can't even see the receiver! Clarence Davis! It looks like Clarence Davis! He's being mobbed!
In one impossible moment, through a literal sea of hands, Oakland had done it. But despite what seemed like a miracle, things weren't going to get any easier. Because a week later, Oakland ran into the hated rival, Steelers. Heading into the fourth quarter, the Raiders led 10-3, until the Steelers poured in 21 unanswered points. The steel curtain had flipped the script, and Oakland's season ended 24-13. The legend of the Sea of Hands lived on, but so did the frustration. A year later, Oakland rolled through the divisional round in a 31-28 thriller against Cincinnati. But even that win came with the shadow looming ahead, because once again, it set up the matchup everyone knew was inevitable. Raiders versus Steelers, the two nastiest defenses in football, staring each other down with a Super Bowl ticket on the line. For 60 minutes, the steel curtain and the silver and black's wall of violence traded body blows. And when the dust cleared, it was heartbreak again. Pittsburgh 16, Oakland 10.
There was a lot of hard hitting by both sides. I think it was a very emotional game, and there was a hell of a lot of meaning to this game. As you know, the winner goes to the Super Bowl and the loser goes home.
To outsiders, Oakland's legend was beginning to sound hollow. The toughest team in the league that couldn't beat the one obstacle standing in their way. But inside their locker room, frustration was turning into something darker. The rage was boiling over. And from opening day in 1976, you could feel it. Early in the game, Raiders safety George Atkinson delivered a forearm to Lynn Swann's head, a hit so violent it knocked the Steelers receiver unconscious. But the thing was, the ball hadn't even been thrown his way. And what made it worse was that Atkinson had already concussed Swann in the previous year's AFC Championship game, with almost the exact same move. Steelers head coach Chuck Noll, normally calm and reserved, snapped. After the game, he called the Raiders secondary a criminal element in the NFL.
We have been labeled as the criminal element of the game, which is, I think, unfair. I've seen Mel Blount hit Cliff in the back of the head.
I think, they were trying to get us to change our style of play, but I don't think it's done that. We're going to still play our same aggressive type game.
A line that would stick to Oakland's defense forever. Atkinson even tried to sue Noll for defamation, but the lawsuit went nowhere. As for the game itself, it was pure chaos. Pittsburgh jumped out to a 28-14 lead, only for Ken the Snake Stabler to drag Oakland back with 3 touchdown passes. Despite throwing 4 interceptions, Stabler stayed cool under pressure, setting up Fred Steinfurt's game-winning field goal. Raiders 31, Steelers 28. Even when they stumbled, like the embarrassing 48-17 blowout loss against New England later in the season, they didn't fall apart. The Soul Patrol secondary of Jack Tatum, George Atkinson, Willie Brown, and Skip Dr. Death Thomas made crossing routes a daredevil stunt. Ted Hendricks, the Mad Stork, was swatting down passes, and up front, the chaos came from monsters like Otis Sistrunk and John Masisak, who made every snap feel like trench warfare. In the divisional round, they faced the very team that had embarrassed them earlier, the New England Patriots. Trailing 21-10 in the fourth quarter, Stabler led a furious rally, capped off by Clarence Davis muscling his way into the end zone for the game-winning score.
We're going to have to play our best next week because we've been here before, and damn it, this is a hurdle that we got to get over.
Next came the Steelers. 3 years in a row, Pittsburgh had ended Oakland's dreams, but this time was different. Their defense suffocated Pittsburgh's attack, holding them scoreless in 3 of the 4 quarters. They forced turnovers, punished ball carriers, and broke the will of the Steel Curtain dynasty. Raiders 24, Steelers 7. And then came the grand stage. Super Bowl 11 against the Minnesota Vikings, the Raiders' first shot at ultimate glory. From the opening whistle, the Raiders' defense smothered Fran Tarkenton. They chased him out of the pocket, battered him every time he scrambled, and punished any Viking receiver who dared to cross the middle. Tarkenton dropped back, searching downfield. Willie Brown locked onto his eyes. He jumped the route, snatched the ball, and returned it 75 yards for the touchdown. And when the dust settled, it wasn't close. Raiders 32, Vikings 14. The villains of the NFL had finally become its champions. So they entered 1977 with a bullseye on their back, and they wore it proudly. John Madden's team went 11-3, their 6th straight season with double-digit wins, and they did it in the same punishing way as always. In the divisional round against the Baltimore Colts, football turned into pure mayhem. Jack Tatum and George Atkinson continued to spark outrage across the league with hits, as the criminal elements label continued to grow. But in Oakland, it wasn't an insult. It was a compliment. Al Davis loved it, and Raiders Nation fed off it. With the season slipping away late in regulation, Ken Stabler dropped back and heaved a desperate ball deep toward tight end Dave Casper. Casper twisted mid-stride, eyes skyward, and over his shoulder he somehow hauled it in. They called it Ghost to the Post. That miracle set up the game-tying field goal, and in double overtime, Casper struck again, slipping past the defense for the winning touchdown. The Raiders walked out of Baltimore with a 37-31 victory, advancing to the AFC Championship game for the 5th straight year. On New Year's Day in Denver, the Raiders and Broncos traded blows like fighters who refused to fall. Denver's Orange Crush defense swarmed Ken Stabler as the Broncos escaped with a 20-17 win. And by 1978, it wasn't just opponents who had grown tired of the Raiders' brutality. It was the league itself. The NFL had decided that Oakland's defense was too good and too ruthless. They caused too many low-scoring slugfests, too many highlight reels filled with wrecked bodies instead of dazzling plays. So that offseason, the Rules Committee went after the bullies of the secondary. Defensive backs could still jam receivers, but only within 5 yards. After that, it was hands off. For the Raiders, it was a direct shot at their identity, but they didn't care. Because in the postseason, Jack Tatum delivered a hit that would forever hang over both his name and the Raiders' reputation. A hit that left Darryl Stingley, a wide receiver with a bright career ahead of him, paralyzed from the chest down. Tatum was never penalized for the hit. By the rules of the day, it was clean. Tatum was a villain, but he didn't care. "I didn't apologize. That was football," Tatum said. "I was sorry that he got hurt, but to go out and apologize for the way I played football? That's never going to happen." However, the new rules soon exposed cracks. Willie Brown was still crafty, still able to bait quarterbacks into mistakes, but at 37, chasing receivers who now had more freedom than ever was a different battle. Atkinson's tactics drew more flags, and even Tatum had to adjust to a game that suddenly demanded precision over punishment, and the offense didn't help. Kenny Stabler threw just 16 touchdowns against 30 interceptions as the Raiders finished 9-7 and missed the playoffs for the first time since 1971. After the season, John Madden, who had defined Raider football as much as anyone on the field, stepped down.
I gave it everything I had. I don't have anymore. I'm retiring from football coaching, and I'm never going to coach again.
And following another year of missing the playoffs in 1979, it seemed like the dynasty was over, or so we thought. Because if history had taught anyone anything, it was this: never count out the Raiders. Not when Al Davis was running the show. Not when their locker room was still full of outlaws who lived for chaos. But 1980 wasn't a smooth season. Al Davis was in open war with the league, fighting to move his franchise to Los Angeles. Fans staged Save Our Raiders protests at the Coliseum. The team started the year with Dan Pastorini under center and stumbled out to 2-3 before he went down with an injury. In stepped Jim Plunkett, a 32-year-old cast-off who had been written off as a bust years earlier. And suddenly everything changed. The defense found its bite again. They led the league in interceptions with 35 of them and 52 takeaways overall. They punished teams against the run, holding opponents to just 3.4 yards a carry. And they had a new secret weapon, cornerback Lester Hayes. With stickum smeared on his hands, his arms, practically dripping off his uniform, Hayes turned into a one-man no-fly zone. He picked off 13 passes in the regular season, and then added 5 more in the playoffs. Quarterbacks called throwing to his side a death wish. He was so unstoppable that the league had to ban Stickum the very next year, in what became known as the Lester Hayes rule. The playoffs became a perfect showcase for the last great stand of this Raider defense. In the wild card, they beat the Houston Oilers, and fittingly, their old quarterback Kenny Stabler, by picking him off twice and battering him into frustration. Then came the frozen nightmare in Cleveland, better known as Red Right 88. 0 degrees, wind howling off Lake Erie, and both teams locked in a slugfest where points were scarcer than warmth. With under a minute left, the Browns were in striking distance. One throw could send the Raiders home. Brian Sipe dropped back, looking for his tight end in the end zone, but the Raiders had been waiting. Mike Davis read it, broke on the ball, and somehow, on turf that was more ice rink than football field, slid, stumbled, and clutched the interception of his life.
Intercepted the ball. Michael Davis is the man that picked it off.
80,000 Cleveland fans stood in disbelief, while the Raiders' sideline exploded. But the nightmare for opponents wasn't over. because next came the AFC Championship in San Diego. On paper, the Raiders had no shot. Dan Fouts and the Air Coryell Chargers were rewriting the passing game, but the Raiders' defense hammered receivers off the line, smothered timing routes, and hit Fouts until even his completions came with bruises. What was supposed to be a track meet turned into trench warfare. And when the dust cleared, it was Oakland 34, San Diego 27. And in Super Bowl 15, the Outlaws finished the job. Against Dick Vermeil's Philadelphia Eagles, they put on a defensive masterpiece. Rod Martin had 3 interceptions, a Super Bowl record that still hasn't been touched. By the final whistle, there was no miracle comeback for Philly, only the sight of the Raiders celebrating as the first wildcard team to ever hoist the Lombardi Trophy.
This was our finest hour. This was the finest hour in the history of the Oakland Raiders. The Tom Flores, the coaches, and the great athletes, you were magnificent out there today.
For the Soul Patrol, it was one last roar. The years had taken their toll, the league had changed the rules, and the dynasty had started to age. In 1980, they proved the bite was still there. However, the true measure of their dominance wasn't just in box scores, but in the NFL rulebook itself. The Raiders were the reason for new restrictions on contact, on pass coverage, on how a defense could punish defenseless receivers. Their record tells one story: division crowns, playoff runs, a Lombardi Trophy. But their legacy, well, it tells another. The bruises they left behind, the fear they carved into opponents. Because the Raiders of the 70s weren't just a defense, they were outlaws. With old man Willie Brown locking down receivers, the assassin Jack Tatum, Skip Dr. Death Thomas, and George Hitman Atkinson patrolling the skies as the Soul Patrol, Ted Mad Stork Hendricks towering over the linebackers, and Otis, the man from Mars Sistrunk, bringing raw fury in the trenches, the Raiders forged the most feared defense in NFL history. If you enjoyed this video, stick with BLITZ, subscribe, and check out some of our other content right here.